Lizzie Borden, 1892, Chapter 1. The House of Shadows. The summer sun of 1892 cast a merciless glow upon the cobblestone streets of Fall River, Massachusetts. The air clung thick and heavy, almost suffocating. At the corner of 2nd Street, the Borden residence stood, its modest facade concealing the wealth and unease within. The house was ordinary at first glance, 2 stories of pale clapboard, windows shuttered against the heat. Yet to those who lived nearby, there was nothing ordinary about it. Behind its walls lived Andrew Borden, a man of immense thrift despite his fortune. His second wife, Abby, dutiful yet distant. His daughters Emma and Lizzie, and the weary maid, Bridget Sullivan. Theirs was not a household of warmth and laughter. Instead, it was a prison of routines, cold glances, and whispers swallowed by silence. Neighbors said the Bordens rarely opened their doors to company. Children who passed by slowed their steps, sensing the weight of something unspoken. Inside, shadows lingered in corners long after the lamps were extinguished, and the air carried the stale odor of secrets. Lizzie, at 32, carried herself with poise, yet her eyes betrayed an unrest. She was not close to her stepmother, and her father's tight grasp on money frustrated her. She longed for freedom, for escape from the suffocating walls of 2nd Street. Emma, her elder sister, often shared her discontent. Though Emma's temperament was more reserved, it was on the morning of August 4th, 1892, that the carefully contained tension of the Borden household would shatter into violence. The day began as many others. Andrew prepared for his business affairs. Abby busied herself with household chores. Bridget labored in the kitchen despite feeling ill. And Lizzie drifted through the house with a quiet restlessness. But the silence that morning was not ordinary. It was too still, too fragile, as if the house itself knew what was to come. At around 9 a.m., Abby ascended the stairs to tidy the guest room where Andrew's brother-in-law had stayed the night before. The upper hall was dim, the air thick. She moved methodically, unaware of the footsteps that followed. Soft and deliberate, the maid Bridget, sweating in the kitchen, thought she heard something, a faint thud. The scrape of wood butt dismissed it. Lizzie, nearby, was calm, her movements deliberate. Later, when questioned, her words would shift, as if she herself were caught in the haze of that fateful morning. By 11 a.m., Andrew returned home, complaining of not feeling well. He settled on the sofa, the day's heat pressing down on him, his eyes heavy with fatigue. Bridget retired upstairs to rest, leaving the stillness of the parlor unbroken. But somewhere in that silence, death was waiting. When the clock neared noon, Fall River would be shaken forever. For within those walls, 2 lives would be ended by the swing of a blade, and 1 woman's name would be etched into legend. Lizzie Andrew Borden. Chapter 2. The first blow. The house on 2nd Street was quiet, almost too quiet. The air seemed heavy, pressing against every wall, every window pane, as though warning of something unspeakable waiting to unfold. Upstairs, in the guest bedroom, Abby Borden adjusted the bedding, her movements slow in the summer heat. She did not notice the shadow that slipped across the threshold behind her. She did not hear the faint intake of breath that lingered, just long enough to disturb the silence. The figure raised an axe's blade glinting in the dim light that filtered through the lace curtains. In that instant, time seemed to hold its breath. Then the first blow struck Abby at the back of her head, splitting through bone with terrifying precision. She gasped, staggered, and collapsed face first onto the floor. But the assault did not end there. The unseen hand delivered strike after strike. 11 blows in total, each one severing flesh, shattering bone, until the quiet room was transformed into a chamber of horror. Blood pooled across the carpet, dark and spreading, soaking into the fabric of the room like a stain that would never fade. The smell of iron filled the air. Downstairs, Bridget dozed, exhausted from the heat and her chores. Lizzie lingered in the kitchen, her presence come to calm. Later, she would testify she had no idea of what transpired above. Yet some would question, how could she not hear? How could she not sense death unfolding just beyond the walls? At 11:30, Andrew Borden returned home from his errands. He placed his key in the lock, but the door stuck, refusing him entry. "Lizzie," he called, his voice sharp, weary. Bridget hurried down the stairs to assist, cursing under her breath. She forced the door open at last, and Andrew entered. Collapsing into his familiar armchair in the sitting room, he complained of dizziness. His face was pale, his voice low. Lizzie offered him a seat, arranging cushions as if nothing in the world were amiss. Upstairs, the body of Abby Borden lay cooling, silent. The house once again grew quiet. But it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence before the storm. Andrew leaned back, closing his eyes. He would never open them again. Chapter 3. The axe descends again. The parlor was heavy with silence. The ticking of the clock on the mantel was the only sound, each second a sharp reminder of time running out. Andrew Borden leaned back in his armchair, his eyes heavy, his body weary from the morning's errands. He did not know that danger lingered close. So close he could have reached out and touched it. Lizzie appeared calm, offering her father a place to rest. She arranged the pillows beneath his head, smoothing them with care. Her expression was unreadable, her movements deliberate. Some would later wonder, was it concern or calculation? Upstairs, Abby's blood continued to seep into the carpet, unseen, unfelt by the man below. Death already walked within the walls of 2nd Street. It was only a matter of time before it came again. Andrew sighed and closed his eyes. The house was dim, curtains drawn to shield against the summer sun. In the shadows, a figure moved, silent, steady, purposeful. The axe was raised once more. The first blow struck Andrew across the temple. His body jerked, blood spraying across the sofa. Before he could utter a sound, the second strike fell. Then the third, again and again, until his features were rendered unrecognizable. 10 times the blade descended, crushing, tearing, erasing all trace of the man who had ruled his household with iron thrift. When it was over, Andrew Borden's body slumped lifelessly in his chair, his blood staining the upholstery, dripping onto the floor in a slow, steady rhythm. The house fell into silence once more, a silence deeper than before, one that seemed to swallow sound itself. Upstairs, Abby lay dead. Downstairs, Andrew's body cooled. And in the middle of it all, Lizzie stood, calm, her dress spotless, her face composed. Later, she would insist she had discovered her father's body unexpectedly. But in that moment, alone with the corpses of her parents, the truth was locked away in shadows. Outside, the world carried on. Horses clattered over cobblestones, neighbors moved about their daily lives. None could imagine that inside the Borden home, blood had written a legend in crimson, and soon, that legend would spread whispers in the street, cries in the courtroom, and the name Lizzie Borden etched forever in American folklore. Chapter 4. Discovery and Panic. The Borden house had become a tomb of silence, disturbed only by the slow dripping of blood from Andrew's lifeless body. The summer heat pressed against the windows, trapping the smell of iron and decay inside. Bridget Sullivan, weary from chores and the heavy air, had retreated upstairs earlier, but her rest was uneasy. She awoke to Lizzie's voice, sharp yet strangely calm. "Bridget," Lizzie called from the bottom of the stairs. "Come down. Father's hurt." The words seemed hollow, almost casual. Bridget descended, confusion on her face, but when she reached the sitting room, her eyes widened in horror. Andrew Borden sat slumped in his chair, his face unrecognizable, carved by deep, gaping wounds. The cushions beneath him were soaked red. Blood dripped steadily to the floor, pooling beneath the armchair. Bridget froze, clutching the banister, unable to move. Lizzie stood nearby, eerily composed, her dress spotless, her voice level. "Go fetch Dr. Bowen," Lizzie instructed, almost as if rehearsed. "Father is dead. Someone has done this." Bridget stumbled into the street, her cries piercing the midday calm. Neighbors turned their heads, curious, then horrified, as the words spread like fire. "Murder in the Borden house." Within minutes, a crowd gathered outside. Faces pressed against windows. Whispers echoed. Who could have done this? Where is Mrs. Borden? Inside, Lizzie remained in control. She told a neighbor that her stepmother had gone out perhaps to visit a sick friend, but the truth lay upstairs, concealed beneath the still air and the weight of silence. It wasn't long before suspicion arose. Why hadn't Lizzie raised the alarm sooner? How had she remained so calm, her clothing untouched by blood? Questions hung in the air, heavy as the heat itself. Dr. Bowen arrived, his face blanching as he surveyed Andrew's remains. "Good God," he muttered. The horror was beyond anything Fall River had seen. He turned to Lizzie, whose expression was unreadable, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. "Where is your stepmother?" he asked. Lizzie's reply was simple, almost too simple. "I think she went upstairs, but I'm not sure." Her words chilled the room. For if Abby had gone upstairs, she had never come down, and soon another body would be found. Chapter 5. The second body. The house was suffocating with dread. The walls, once silent witnesses to ordinary life, now seemed to hold their breath. Neighbors pressed closer to the windows, desperate for a glimpse inside, while whispers bled into the summer air. Inside, Dr. Bowen, still reeling from the sight of Andrew's mutilated body, looked up the staircase with visible reluctance. A few neighbors, braver than most, offered to search. With a candle in hand, Mrs. Churchill and Bridget ascended the creaking steps. The upstairs hall was heavy with heat and silence. Bridget's hand trembled as she reached for the door of the guest room. With a hesitant push, the door opened, revealing the neatly made bed and the faint scent of lavender. But on the far side of the room, by the bed, a dark shadow stretched across the floor. Mrs. Churchill gasped. The candlelight flickered, revealing Abby Borden's body sprawled face down between the bed and the dresser. Her back bordered deep, horrific marks of repeated strikes, her hair matted with blood. The sight was grotesque, but it was her position collapsed, as though fleeing, that froze their breath. The cry rang downstairs. "She's here. Mrs. Borden is dead." Dr. Bowen rushed up, his face growing pale. The wounds told their own story. Abby had been attacked first, struck from behind, falling face forward, unable to defend herself. The number of blows was savage. Whoever had done this was consumed by rage. Lizzie, waiting downstairs, barely flinched when the discovery was announced. She pressed a handkerchief lightly to her lips, as if troubled, but her eyes betrayed little emotion. Rumors spread instantly. Both Bordens were dead, hacked to pieces in their own home. Fear seized the neighborhood. Doors were locked, shutters drawn. If such a thing could happen here, who was safe? And still, questions swirled like smoke. How had no one seen an intruder? How could both murders have occurred in daylight, in a house not far from the busy streets of Fall River? The police soon arrived, their boots thudding heavily on the wooden floors. The air grew dense with the stench of death and suspicion. And when their eyes fell on Lizzie composed, her dress immaculate, they began to wonder, was the killer truly outside these walls? Or had she been standing among them all along? The Borden house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, one that would haunt America for generations. Chapter 6. Suspicion falls on Lizzie. The Borden house was filled with voices, now police officers, neighbors, doctors, all speaking over one another in hushed urgency. The once quiet rooms trembled under the weight of speculation. But amidst the chaos, one figure stood unnervingly calm. Lizzie, her dress was immaculate, her hair neat, her face pale yet composed. In contrast to the horror around her, she seemed untouched, as though she existed slightly apart from reality. The officers began to ask questions. Bridget, pale and shaken, recounted what she had seen. Neighbors whispered about how oddly collected Lizzie seemed. Dr. Bowen, while careful with his words, admitted it was strange that Lizzie had discovered her father's body but shown little hysteria. Then there was the matter of her dress. Not a single drop of blood marred the fabric. How could one be in such close proximity to two butchered bodies and remain so perfectly clean? A sergeant asked her directly, "Miss Borden, where were you when your mother was killed?" Lizzie's reply was smooth, rehearsed. "I believe she was out, perhaps visiting a friend. I was in the barn, looking for iron and tin for fishing sinkers. When I came back, I found father." Her voice trailed off, as if the words themselves carried no weight. The officers exchanged glances. The barn, upon inspection, was stiflingly hot, filled with dust. No footprints in the dirt, no sign she had truly been there. And then came the inconsistencies. Lizzie had told one neighbor her stepmother was out. To another, she said Abby had returned. Her words shifted like smoke. Impossible to hold steady. Rumors spread like fire through Fall River. Some whispered of a stranger seen near the house. Others of Irish laborers or vagrants passing by. Yet suspicion always circled back, tightening its noose around Lizzie. The police asked about possible motives. Everyone in town knew the Borden's home life was strained. Lizzie and her sister Emma resented their stepmother, believing she schemed for the inheritance. And Andrew, wealthy but notoriously frugal, kept his daughters in a house without plumbing or comforts, despite his fortune. Resentment had long been simmering within the walls of 92 2nd Street. Lizzie's composure began to crack, if only slightly. When pressed about her relationship with Abby, she simply replied, "She is not my mother. She is Mrs. Borden." The words hung heavy in the air. As night fell, lanterns lit the Borden home, casting long, trembling shadows. The air was thick with unease. The town no longer whispered of an unknown killer roaming the streets. Instead, eyes turned inward to the pale, quiet woman at the center of it all. Lizzie Borden was no longer just a witness. She was a suspect. Chapter 7. The Inquest. The courtroom was small, stifling, and filled with a tense anticipation. Fall River had never seen such a spectacle. The daughter of one of its wealthiest families, now seated as a prime suspect in the murder of her father and stepmother. Lizzie sat, straight-backed in the wooden chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple, dark dress, her face pale, her eyes steady but unreadable. The air was heavy with expectation as the magistrates and lawyers prepared to question her. When the first question came, Lizzie's answers were calm, almost too calm. She spoke clearly, but her words often tangled into contradictions. "Miss Borden," the prosecutor asked, "where were you at the time of your father's death?" Lizzie answered smoothly, "In the barn, looking for sinkers." "And when your stepmother was killed?" Lizzie hesitated. Her fingers twitched ever so slightly. "I don't know. I think she was out. Perhaps she had gone upstairs. I didn't see her." The magistrates exchanged glances. Her testimony shifted each time it was asked, details sliding like shadows on a wall. Then came the questions about her dress. Witnesses claimed Lizzie had been seen burning a garment in the kitchen stove days after the murders. She explained that it had been soiled with paint, of no use anymore. Yet suspicion coiled tighter. Was it paint or blood? The prosecutor pressed further. "Did you love your stepmother, Miss Borden?" Lizzie's eyes flickered. Her reply was cold, almost dismissive. "She is not my mother. She is Mrs. Borden." The words, once again, struck like a knife in the silence of the courtroom. Whispers erupted in the gallery. To the public, her demeanor seemed uncanny, too composed, too detached for a grieving daughter. As the inquest continued, Lizzie's contradictions mounted. She claimed to have heard nothing, seen nothing, though both murders occurred in the very house she occupied. She insisted she had no quarrel with her father or stepmother, though everyone in Fall River knew otherwise. By the end of the inquest, suspicion had sharpened into something undeniable. Though the evidence was circumstantial, her inconsistent testimony, her calmness, and the whispers of motive painted a chilling portrait. Lizzie Borden, once the quiet daughter of privilege, now stood at the center of America's most infamous murder case. And as she was led out of the courtroom, the crowd outside erupted half in outrage, half in fascination. The legend of Lizzie Borden was being born. Chapter 8. The Trial. June 1893. The courtroom in New Bedford was packed to its highest capacity. Every bench overflowed, every hallway crowded. Reporters jotted furiously in their notebooks. Artists sketched the pale figure of Lizzie Borden, and whispers rippled through the air like smoke. It was not just a trial, it was a spectacle. Newspapers across America had turned Fall River into a stage, and Lizzie into both villain and victim. Lizzie entered the courtroom dressed in black silk, a mourning attire that cast her in the image of a grieving daughter. Yet her expression remained eerily calm, her composure unbroken. The prosecution painted a chilling portrait. Lizzie had motive anger toward her stepmother, resentment of her father's control. She had opportunity, the only one present when both murders occurred. She had Menzan axe, hidden and later found suspiciously clean. They brought witnesses to the stand. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, testified to the tension in the house that morning. Others recounted Lizzie's coldness, her strange behavior, her conflicting statements. Most damning of all was the story of the burned dress. It was covered in paint, Lizzie insisted. But the prosecutors asked the jury, was it paint or blood? The defense, however, fought with equal fire. They argued Lizzie had always been a dutiful daughter, that she had no history of violence. They reminded the jury of her fragile health, of the impossibility of committing to such brutal murders without being seen. Without a trace of blood on her person, witnesses swore Lizzie adored her father, despite disputes over money. Others claimed the police had mishandled evidence, tainting the investigation from the start. Throughout it all, Lizzie remained composed. She sat silently, occasionally whispering to her lawyers, her face pale and unreadable. To some, this calmness seemed like innocence. To others, it was the mask of a killer. The trial stretched on for weeks, the nation hanging on every headline. Each morning, crowds gathered outside the courthouse, shouting, speculating, arguing. Inside, the jurors wrestled with a question that seemed to have no clear answer. Was Lizzie Borden a cold-blooded murderer, or was she a victim of circumstance, trapped by suspicion and rumor? As the trial neared its end, one thing was certain, no matter the verdict. The name Lizzie Borden would forever haunt American history. Chapter 9. The Verdict, June 20, 1893. The courthouse in New Bedford was eerily silent. The jury had deliberated for more than an hour, their whispers behind closed doors lost to the anxious crowd waiting outside. Reporters sharpened their pencils, artists poised their pens, and the world held its breath. Lizzie Borden sat at the defense table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her pale face betrayed no emotion, though her eyes, dark and unreadable, never left the jury box. The foreman rose, holding a slip of paper that seemed heavier than stone. The judge asked the question that echoed like a thunderclap across the chamber. Gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict? A pause. The foreman cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor, we have. He handed the slip to the clerk, who read aloud, on the charge of murder of Andrew Jackson Borden and Abby Durfee Borden. We find the defendant, Lizzie Andrew Borden, not guilty. The words seemed to split the air in two. Some cried out in disbelief, others cheered. Lizzie closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her lips parting in what looked almost like a smile. For the first time, her composure cracked not into fear, but into quiet relief. Her sister Emma wept beside her, clutching her hand. The defense lawyers exchanged triumphant nods. The prosecution, stone-faced, sat in silence. Outside, the crowd erupted. Some shouted that justice had been served, others that a killer had been set free. The newspapers, already waiting with ink and headlines, rushed to print the words, Lizzie Borden acquitted. The judge dismissed the court. Lizzie stood, bowed her head slightly, and walked from the room a free woman. Yet freedom did not erase suspicion. The whispers would follow her forever. Though she had escaped the noose, she could never escape the shadows. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. When the verdict was read, not guilty Lizzie Borden walked out of the New Bedford courthouse a free woman. Yet freedom did not bring peace. The world beyond the courtroom walls was divided. Some believed the jury had made the right decision, that there was no solid evidence to condemn her. Others were convinced that justice had failed, that a murderess now walked freely among them. Back in Fall River, Lizzie and her sister Emma inherited their father's fortune. They purchased a grand new home on French Street, far from the gloomy house on 2nd Street where the murders had occurred. Lizzie named it Maplecroft. The mansion was elegant, its halls wide and filled with light. Yet the people of Fall River never let Lizzie forget. Neighbors whispered as she passed. Shopkeepers turned their eyes away. Children sang a cruel rhyme in the streets. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The rhyme spread like wildfire, immortalizing her name in a sing-song horror. Though acquitted, Lizzie lived as though imprisoned by suspicion. Invitations to social gatherings ceased. Former friends avoided her. The high society of Fall River, which she so longed to enter, kept its doors closed. In 1905, a final fracture split the Borden sisters apart. Emma left Maplecroft, abandoning Lizzie without explanation. Rumors suggested it was over Lizzie's behavior, her increasingly flamboyant lifestyle, her new friendships with actresses, her defiance of the town's scorn. Emma never returned, and the sisters remained estranged until death. Lizzie lived the rest of her life in that grand house, alone with the shadows. She traveled, hosted gatherings with those who dared to attend, and tried to escape the whispers, but they always followed. In 1927, at the age of 67, Lizzie Borden died quietly of pneumonia. Few attended her funeral. Even in death, she was isolated, her name forever bound to the blood-stained morning of August 1892. She left behind wealth, but not respect, a house, but not a home, a life, but not peace. Chapter 11. The legend. Time has a way of distilling truth into myth and myth into legend. For Lizzie Borden, the line between what happened on that hot August morning in 1892 and what people believe happened has long since blurred. The rhyme became her curse. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Children sang it on playgrounds, their laughter carrying the echo of murder. Journalists repeated it in headlines. Historians cited it as though it were fact, yet the numbers were wrong. Abby had been struck 19 times, Andrew 10. But accuracy no longer mattered. The rhyme was more powerful than reality. As decades passed, Lizzie Borden became more than a woman. She became a ghost of American folklore. Her house on 2nd Street, where the murders took place, remained standing. Visitors whispered of cold drafts, of strange noises, of shadows moving when no one was there. Today, it is a bed and breakfast, where guests sleep in the very rooms where Andrew and Abby met their end. Writers, playwrights, and filmmakers seized upon her story. Some painted her as a monster, an unrepentant murderess. Others cast her as a victim of a domineering father, a cruel stepmother, or a society that punished women who resisted. Each version fed the legend, shaping Lizzie into something larger, darker, and stranger than the truth could ever hold. What remains certain is this: Lizzie Borden was acquitted. She lived and died in Fall River. She was never proven guilty, yet her name will forever be synonymous with the axe, with whispers in the dark, with the uneasy sense that evil can hide in plain sight. Legends are not always built on facts. They are built on fear, on fascination, on the questions that refuse to die. And so Lizzie Borden endures, half woman, half spectre, forever swinging her phantom axe in the imagination of America.